Welcome to Death on Clare Island, Chapter 29. A heavy silence hung in the air of Davitt's restaurant, similar to the dense fog that drifted through the streets outside, as Lorcan, Aunt Georgina, and I sat in one of the booths. Have the guards finished with all their interviews and statements? Lorcan asked as he methodically worked his way through a mound of mashed potatoes and boiled ham. Aunt Georgina had invited him to join us, and for once I didn't have the energy to protest his presence. It was kind of comforting to watch him enjoy his food. They're finished with me, I said, picking at the brown bread and vegetable soup that Aunt Georgina had ordered for me. I met with Bridget this morning. Ironically, the initial toxicology report was correct, although not because Matthew was a slip in procedure and Matthew's results got mixed up with some drug user. Her brother's reputation is cleared. But we all know the damage created by the original newspaper accounts, and speculation can never be fully undone. Some people will always wonder. The newspapers don't matter, Aunt Georgina chimed in as she sat back and smiled. Think about how relieved his family is to know the truth. Your intuition about his innocence was right all along. Thank goodness you decided to get involved. I nodded. I know. Bridget is already working with the gallery in Dublin to show Matthew's work, and I was right about the last painting he was working on. The clouds and sky were a map of Clare Island and its coves. He used a technique called displacement painting to create a path to the lighthouse keeper's cottage. That's why there was such a contrast between the sky and the clouds and the colors in the painting's foreground. I shook my head. I only wish I had figured everything out the first time I saw it. What about Peter? Lorcan asked. Did he have any family? None that the police can find, I replied. He told me that his father was a doctor. It sounded like he was also a strict disciplinarian and not too nurturing, but it appears to be a dead end. They've been able to trace Peter back to the time that he served in the Navy. There's some speculation that while he was in the service, he was approached about transporting drugs, and that may be when he began his career as a smuggler. Which reminds me, I looked directly at Lorcan. When Peter and I met you at the Kirk restaurant, I saw the way you stared at him. Did you two know each other? Still doubting me, Star? Lorcan asked. No, I didn't know him, and you're right about the look I gave him. But don't you think I'd want to check him out? Here he was, out with Star O'Brien, the one person I know who is so independent that she's very picky about her friends. That's all it was. His lifestyle provided the perfect cover for his activities, Georgina said. Who would ever have suspected him? He was so charming and concerned about people. Her warm brown eyes held me in her gaze, but I could only frown back. Let's not discuss his charms, Aunt Georgina. I never suspected him. Of course, he never mentioned knowing Matthew or Sharon. In fact, when I first met him on the island, he acted like Matthew was a stranger. Who would have entertained the idea that a successful entrepreneur and community benefactor needed or wanted to be involved with drugs? I only wish I'd been more perceptive. I shifted in my seat, feeling trapped by the furniture around me, and glanced over at Lorcan before looking down at my now cold bowl of soup. So how did Hughes go from the Navy to owning an expensive piece of property and lighthouse on Clare Island? Lorcan wondered. It was nice to see that he didn't seem interested in rubbing my nose in my mistakes for once. Well, after the Navy, he put himself through business college and earned a real estate agent's license. Former coworkers said they suspected his activities in the homes he listed for people. Lorcan seemed confused by this, so I quickly added, it turns out he used the empty houses as pickup points for the drugs. Later he got involved in shipping pieces of antique furniture from Europe, and the police say he may have been smuggling drugs in those as well. The lighthouse, the newsletter, the antiques business, it all provided an ideal front for running a multi-million-dollar drug operation. And sure enough, Clear Island offered a perfect place for boats and shipments around its coves, Aunt Georgina said as she waved to the waitress to bring more tea. I suppose Matthew got involved while he worked on the island restoring the abbey, Lorcan suggested. Not exactly. I shivered, my mind replaying images of Peter and our conversation. Peter met Sharon one day on the island. She and Matthew had just had an argument about the time he'd been spending with Lucia, and Peter seized upon Sharon's vulnerabilities regarding her relationship with Matthew to further his illegal activities. As time went on, her habit got worse, and she began exchanging sex for more drugs. I pushed the soup around the bowl with my spoon before continuing. Matthew knew that Sharon had a dependency problem. The police found a letter from Sharon and Matthew threatening to break off their engagement if he chose to intervene. The police surmised that when he couldn't persuade her to get help, he focused on finding her supplier. That led him to Alan Sky, which in turn led to the knowledge that there was a bigger operation in the area. Matthew may even have caught Peter in the act. That part isn't clear. Peter indicated to me that he'd taken the initiative before Matthew put all the pieces together. It's possible that was Peter's egotistical personality speaking. Who knows what the truth really is? The bottom line is that he killed Matthew first, then decided Sharon was too big of a risk and killed her too. Lorcan paused long enough from his attack on his food to say, I suppose he was behind the anonymous note and the car that attempted to run you down in Dublin. Then he smiled at me before he turned back to his potatoes. Why hadn't I noticed the warmth of his smile before? I wondered as I sank further down into the cushion. Yes, he wanted to have an inside track into the investigation, and he focused his attention on me. I don't know what else to say. I was beguiled by his charm. I plunked my spoon down onto the table. Who was I kidding? I had no appetite. Aunt Georgina sternly took stock of me over the top of her teacup. Listen, Star O'Brien, I won't tolerate any self-pity. You pick yourself right up and move on. I nodded in semi-agreement. Finding my birth mother seems to be a dead end as well. Philly had a lead about a woman in Kong, but when I found out that she's away on holiday for an extended period. I hesitated, then decided to plow ahead. You're right about one thing, Aunt Georgina. It's time to move on. I'm closing up the cottage and returning to the States next week. The tea sloshed over the rim of her cup as she slammed it back into its saucer. What? Jeepers, Star, you can't leave. That's not what I meant. Then she turned to Lorcan. Isn't it time you told her? Stop eating, for God's sake. Lorcan placed his fork on his plate and leaned back into his chair. His eyes surveyed both of us. Star, I know how much you resent my involvement in your affairs. Absolutely, I replied as I sat up straight and prepared to bolt. Well, hear me out. He pulled an official-looking letter out of his shirt pocket. Then pushing his glasses up on his nose, he said, The director of the House of Birth Records is a personal acquaintance of mine. He's offered to help you with your search for information on your mother. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll find anything. There's a good chance there isn't a record in Dublin. But Star, I know you won't quit until you've investigated this as far as it leads you. He grinned at me from across the table as he refolded the paper and placed it in his shirt pocket. I don't run away from anything, Lorcan McHale, I told him firmly. How dare you imply that I'm a quitter? You know what? The States will still be there, but I'm not leaving Ireland until I have some answers. The grin spread across his face while Aunt Georgina called for another pot of tea. Damn him, he knew I'd raise to the bait.